The evening was busy at the hotel lounge. Soft lights hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over polished wood and leather chairs. The air smelled faintly of coffee and freshly baked pastries. A small crowd had gathered near the corner where an old piano sat, its surface scratched but still dignified. It had clearly been part of the lounge for years, and the notes it could play carried stories of the past. Though it now waited silently, almost forgotten, among the crowd, a young woman sat quietly at the piano bench. She wasn't drawing attention to herself. She wore simple clothes, her hair tied back loosely, and she kept her hands folded on her lap. She didn't speak to anyone, didn't try to smile or mingle. Most people didn't notice her at first because the room was full of chatter, laughter, and the occasional clinking of glasses, but then he arrived. A businessman, well known for his sharp suits, expensive watch, and louder-than-life personality, walked into the lounge. Wherever he went, people noticed. Tonight, he had come with a smirk on his face, the kind of smirk that carried confidence, arrogance, and the need to be the center of attention. He scanned the room quickly, sizing up everyone around him, and his eyes landed on the quiet girl at the piano. He approached, leaning slightly as he spoke, his voice carrying across the room. "I bet she won't play a single note," he said, almost to himself, though loud enough for some people to hear. Then he added with a smirk, "She looks like someone who can't even touch the keys properly." A few heads turned. Some people laughed nervously. Some whispered to each other, wondering who he was and why he felt the need to mock someone so quietly sitting alone. The young woman didn't flinch. She didn't even look at him. Her eyes remained downcast and her hands stayed still. Resting lightly on her lap, the businessman chuckled to himself and leaned even closer. "Come on, just one note. Prove me wrong." He expected her to panic, to fumble, or at least to react. But she didn't. She simply lifted her hands slowly and rested them on the keys, her fingers hovering lightly above them. As if she were listening to some invisible melody only she could hear, the audience around them began to notice the tension. The room, once filled with soft chatter, had become quiet. People leaned forward slightly, curious about what would happen next. There was something unusual about the young woman's presence. It wasn't fear or nervousness, and it wasn't arrogance. It was calmness. She seemed entirely at peace, despite being challenged so openly in front of everyone. The businessman's smirk grew wider. He straightened up, crossing his arms. "Well, are you going to play or not? Don't waste everyone's time." He laughed, expecting at least a small reaction, a nervous glance, a shake of the head, anything to show that she knew she couldn't meet his challenge, but she didn't react. She closed her eyes briefly and inhaled slowly, as if preparing herself for something greater. In that moment, it felt like the entire room held its breath. The soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant murmur of the city outside, and even the faint ticking of a nearby clock all seemed to fade. It was just her, the piano, and the invisible music waiting to flow through her fingertips. Some people whispered, unsure what they were witnessing. "Is she really going to play?" One person asked softly. Another shook their head, thinking maybe she would just get up and leave. But she stayed, poised and ready. The businessman, growing slightly impatient, leaned closer again. "Don't be shy. Just touch a key, anything, one note. Let's see what you've got." His tone had changed slightly, from mocking to almost demanding. He wanted to see her fail, to hear the awkward, clumsy sound of someone not prepared to play. She finally moved her fingers gently to the keys. But instead of striking them harshly or quickly, she let her hands linger, brushing the keys softly as if testing the air around them. There was a delicacy to her touch that surprised a few in the audience. Even the businessman raised an eyebrow, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. Minutes passed, and she still didn't play a full note. She simply let her fingers rest lightly on the keys, moving slightly, feeling the piano beneath her hands. The businessman snorted, clearly annoyed. "This is ridiculous," he said, shaking his head. "I've never seen someone so scared of a piano in my life." But she wasn't scared. Her calm demeanor suggested she was waiting for the right moment, listening to the rhythm of the room, perhaps even the rhythm of her own heartbeat. People began to notice the quiet power in her patience. It wasn't that she lacked courage. It was that she understood something deeper, something that went beyond showing off or proving anyone wrong. A few members of the audience shifted in their seats. Some were curious, others skeptical, but all were watching intently. The tension grew with each passing second. You could almost feel the anticipation in the air, like waiting for a storm to break or a secret to be revealed. The businessman, growing increasingly frustrated, muttered under his breath, "Why won't she just play?" His usual confidence seemed to falter, replaced by a flicker of doubt. He had expected an easy laugh, a quick show of embarrassment, but instead, he found himself facing stillness, quiet confidence, and patience he wasn't prepared for the young woman. This moment wasn't about winning or losing. She didn't care about his smirk or his laughter. She cared about the music inside her, the story she wanted to tell through her fingers. And though no sound had yet come from the piano, you could almost sense it in the air, waiting to be released. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she shifted her fingers and let them brush against a few keys. The notes were faint, delicate, almost like a whisper. The businessman's smirk faltered. He leaned in closer, squinting, unsure what to make of this subtle sound. The audience leaned forward instinctively, drawn to the softness. The quiet promise of something extraordinary. No one had expected this. No one had expected the patience, the calm, the quiet presence that filled the space around her. And in that moment, the businessman, who had come expecting to humiliate someone, began to feel something unfamiliar: doubt, curiosity, even a touch of respect, though he would never admit it out loud. And that was how it began, the slow, quiet, almost magical beginning of a story that no one in that lounge would ever forget. The young woman had not yet played the music she had been waiting to share, but she had already captured the attention of everyone in the room. Even the smirking businessman could no longer ignore the quiet strength, the patience, and the presence of someone who refused to be rushed, mocked, or intimidated. It was clear to everyone watching that this was not just about playing a piano. This was about courage, about self-control, about inner strength. And for those few moments, as she sat there, poised and ready, the lounge felt transformed. What had started as a mocking challenge had become a moment of suspense, anticipation, and quiet wonder. No one knew what would happen next. The air was thick with expectation, like the calm before a storm or the pause before a story's most powerful chapter. And the young woman, sitting quietly at the piano, knew that the next moment would change everything for herself, for the businessman, and for everyone watching. The young woman's fingers hovered above the piano keys, still motionless for a moment longer. The businessman, standing a little too close, was growing impatient. His confident smirk had begun to fade, replaced with a flicker of irritation. He tapped his foot, shifted his weight, and muttered under his breath, "Why won't she just play? This is ridiculous." The audience, on the other hand, had gone completely silent. Some leaned forward in their chairs. Others had stopped their conversations mid-sentence, unsure whether they were witnessing hesitation or something much more intentional. There was a strange tension in the air, like everyone was holding their breath. Even the background noise of clinking glasses and soft chatter had disappeared. Then, as if deciding it was finally time, she took a slow, deep breath. Her eyes remained closed, but there was a quiet determination in her posture. Her fingers moved lightly across the keys, not striking them harshly, not playing a melody just yet, but brushing them gently as if testing the surface, feeling the piano's texture and listening to the faint echo it could produce. The businessman leaned forward slightly. He could no longer hide his curiosity. "Well?" he said, his voice now a mixture of impatience and surprise. "What are you waiting for?" "Just a note. Come on." He had expected embarrassment, and yet there was something different about the calm in her movements. Her first notes finally came, but they were unlike anything the businessman had imagined. They were soft, barely audible at first, almost like a whisper carried through the air. But even in their softness, there was a precision, a control that spoke of years of quiet practice, patience, and dedication. The audience was caught off guard. People exchanged looks, unsure of what they were hearing, but captivated nonetheless. She didn't rush. Each note was deliberate, each movement of her fingers thoughtful. The melody that slowly unfolded was gentle, almost hesitant, yet full of emotion. There was sadness in some notes, joy in others, and a subtle sense of hope woven throughout. The businessman's smirk had disappeared entirely. He stared, speechless, unable to reconcile the quiet young woman. He had mocked with the music that was now filling the room. Some members of the audience began to whisper to one another. "She's incredible," one said quietly. "Did you hear that? She's not just playing, she's telling a story." Another added, "I've never seen someone make a piano sound like this. It's alive." The businessman, feeling a strange mix of awe and unease, took a small step back. He had expected a mistake, a wrong note, a sign of inexperience. Instead, he was faced with something he hadn't anticipated: raw, unspoken talent combined with calm confidence. Every note she played seemed to speak directly to the hearts of everyone in the room, touching feelings that had been buried under laughter, chatter, or self-importance. Her eyes remained closed, but her body moved with the music. Her head tilted slightly, her fingers dancing lightly, and her foot pressed gently on the piano pedals to give depth to the sound. There was a rhythm to her, a flow that seemed almost magical, as if she were translating emotions into sound. The businessman's earlier arrogance was gone. In its place was a growing respect, though he tried hard not to show it. Minutes passed, and the soft melody grew stronger, richer. The once faint notes now filled the entire lounge, surrounding everyone like a warm embrace. People sat motionless, some with tears in their eyes, some simply staring in awe. No one clapped, no one spoke. The music had created its own world, separate from the lounge, separate from the businessman's mocking words. He realized that this was more than just music. She was telling a story of quiet strength, patience, and inner resolve. Each note was a word, each chord a sentence. And while the audience may not have understood the words, they felt the meaning deep in their hearts. He glanced around at the other people in the room. Some were holding hands, some had their heads tilted in disbelief, and a few were leaning forward as if trying to catch every sound more clearly. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Where there had once been laughter and casual conversation, there was now reverence. Everyone, even the businessman, had become completely absorbed. The young woman's hands moved with increasing confidence, flowing seamlessly from one key to another. The music was no longer just soft. It had taken on a life of its own. There were moments of tension, moments of quiet reflection, and moments that lifted the spirit in ways words could never describe. The businessman's initial expectation that she would fail was completely shattered. He felt a sense of humility he hadn't experienced in years, maybe ever. He tried to speak, perhaps to regain some control of the situation, but no words came. Every sentence he could think of sounded trivial compared to the beauty unfolding in front of him. He realized that mocking her had been foolish, shallow, and meaningless. The music was doing something far more powerful than he could ever achieve with money, status, or arrogance. The young woman continued, her eyes still closed. She wasn't playing for the businessman or for the audience. She was playing for herself, for the music that lived inside her. And in doing so, she had captured everyone else. Without effort, without a word, without a single gesture beyond the movement of her hands and the expression of her soul through the piano, people began to shift in their seats, feeling the emotions rise and fall with the melody. A few had tears rolling down their cheeks, overcome by the honesty and purity of the performance. Others were smiling softly, remembering long-forgotten memories, or simply feeling peace they didn't know they needed. The room had become a sanctuary. All because one person had the courage to play quietly, patiently, and with complete devotion to her art. The businessman finally took a deep breath, realizing he had been completely wrong. He had expected arrogance, weakness, or fear, and instead he had witnessed courage, talent, and grace. It humbled him. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, a mix of admiration and self-reflection. He understood that his life had been full of competition, pride, and the need to be seen as better than others. But here was a person who reminded him that true power comes quietly, not through words or wealth, but through presence, skill, and integrity. The young woman's fingers moved with purpose, the melody growing richer, more intricate. It was clear she had practiced for years, but more importantly, she played with understanding, emotion, and a deep connection to the music itself. Every person in the room felt it, not just with their ears, but with their hearts. Time seemed to lose meaning. The song did not rush or pause unnecessarily. It flowed naturally, like water over rocks, smooth yet powerful, soft yet unrelenting. The businessman could no longer maintain his earlier attitude. The smirk, the arrogance, the laughter, all were gone. He was witnessing humility, mastery, and courage in its purest form. Finally, the young woman played a series of chords that seemed to signal the approaching end of her piece. Each note was precise, deliberate, and emotional. The room remained completely silent, not from awkwardness, but from respect. Even the air felt heavy with the lingering power of the music. When she struck the last note, there was a pause, a moment of absolute stillness. It was almost as if the piano itself was holding its breath. Then, slowly, softly, the audience began to clap. Not the casual applause of polite strangers, but deep, heartfelt claps filled with admiration, wonder, and awe. The businessman, standing closest to her, remained frozen for a moment. Then, almost hesitantly, he clapped too. But it wasn't polite or sarcastic, he clapped from the heart. He approached her quietly, avoiding eye contact at first, unsure what to say. His voice, when it came, was soft, almost reverent. I was wrong, he admitted. I didn't expect any of this. The young woman opened her eyes for the first time during the performance. She looked at him, not with anger or arrogance, but with quiet confidence and calm understanding. Her smile was gentle, almost as if forgiving his earlier behavior without needing to say a word. In that moment, the lounge felt completely transformed. The music had done more than entertain, it had humbled, inspired, and united everyone present. And the businessman, usually the loudest, most assertive person in the room, had been reminded that true strength comes from patience, skill, and humility, not power, money, or mockery. As the applause continued, the young woman quietly closed the piano lid. She didn't speak or make any announcement. She simply smiled, stood, and walked away with grace. People continued to talk, laugh, and whisper about what they had just witnessed. But the memory of the music lingered in their hearts, soft but powerful, like a quiet force that could never be forgotten. And for the businessman, the experience left a mark he would carry forever. He had learned in just a few minutes that underestimating someone could lead to lessons far greater than any business meeting, argument, or competition could ever teach. The young woman sat back at the piano, her fingers ready to continue, and the room fell silent once again. The first part of her melody had already captured everyone's attention, but she wasn't done. This part of her performance was meant to reach deeper, to touch the hearts of every person in the lounge, and perhaps even change the way they saw the world for a moment. Her hands moved with a calm confidence, striking the keys in a rhythm that was both powerful and delicate. The notes began to rise and fall, flowing like waves across the room, wrapping around every listener. It was a melody that carried emotion without words, happiness, sorrow, longing, and hope all at once. The businessman watched, unable to look away. His earlier arrogance had completely disappeared. He had expected to dominate the room, to humiliate someone quiet and unassuming, and instead he found himself humbled by the sheer skill and depth of the performance. He realized that no amount of money, power, or influence could create the music he was hearing. The audience leaned closer, silent, almost afraid to breathe. Each note was perfectly placed, each chord striking an emotional resonance that went beyond simple music. Some people had tears in their eyes, moved not only by the melody, but by the courage of the young woman playing it. She had faced ridicule, and instead of responding with anger or defensiveness, she had chosen to let her art speak for itself. Her fingers moved faster now, dancing across the keys in a display of precision and emotion. The melody shifted from quiet reflection to energetic excitement, drawing the listeners in completely. The music seemed to tell a story without words, a story of patience, inner strength, and quiet determination. The businessman's chest felt tight. He had never experienced something like this before. He had spent his life judging people by appearances, by what they said, or how they acted. And now, here was someone who had said almost nothing, yet communicated more in a few minutes than he had in years of conversation and deals. Some members of the audience whispered to each other in awe. "She's incredible," one said. "It's like she's speaking to our hearts directly." Another added, "I feel like I'm hearing emotions I didn't even know I had." The young woman's eyes remained closed, but her expression was serene. She was fully absorbed in the music and the story she was telling. She didn't care about the applause, the recognition, or the businessman's reaction. She cared about the music itself, and in doing so, she gave the audience an experience that was unforgettable. As the melody progressed, it became more complex, weaving different emotions together seamlessly. There were moments of softness that invited reflection, followed by crescendos that filled the room with an almost overwhelming beauty. People sat in silence, captivated, feeling a connection to something bigger than themselves. The businessman felt an unfamiliar humility wash over him. He had believed himself to be powerful and important, yet here he was, reduced to a silent observer, forced to confront the truth that true greatness does not come from wealth or status. It comes from dedication, talent, and courage, the courage to be oneself even in the face of ridicule. A few tears ran down his cheeks, though he quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. He couldn't deny the effect the music had on him. He was learning a lesson he had ignored for years, that true respect is earned, not demanded, and that sometimes the quietest voices carry the most profound messages. The young woman's performance reached its climax. Her hands moved with a speed and precision that was breathtaking, yet every note remained perfectly controlled. The melody soared, powerful and free, filling every corner of the lounge. The audience was on the edge of their seats, completely absorbed. Forgetting everything else in the room, finally, she began to slow down, letting the last notes linger in the air. Each chord was struck gently, almost reverently, as if honoring the moment itself. The room remained silent for a heartbeat after the final note faded. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was filled with emotion, awe, and a deep sense of connection. Then slowly, applause began. First a few scattered claps, then more and more until the room erupted in a standing ovation. People cheered, some with tears in their eyes, and even the businessman clapped, his face a mixture of respect, wonder, and humility. He stepped forward, finally meeting her eyes, and for the first time he spoke without arrogance. I was completely wrong," he said quietly. "You've shown me something I'll never forget." The young woman smiled softly. She didn't boast or seek praise. She simply nodded, acknowledging the respect and admiration without needing to say a word. She had shown everyone, including the businessman, that talent, courage, and humility are more powerful than arrogance, money, or mockery. In that moment, the lounge felt different, full of warmth, inspiration, and a quiet reminder that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected places. And for the businessman, the lesson was clear: underestimate no one. Judge no one by appearances, and never forget that true greatness often comes in quiet. Unassuming forms, the applause continued to echo in the lounge, but the young woman gently closed the piano lid, signaling the end of her performance. The audience remained standing, clapping, and whispering in awe. Some had tears streaming down their faces. Others were simply smiling, touched by the beauty and emotion they had just experienced. The businessman, still humbled, approached her slowly. He wasn't sure what to say at first. Words felt inadequate, unable to capture the mix of respect, amazement, and humility he was feeling. Finally, he found the courage to speak. I didn't expect any of this," he admitted. "You've taught me a lesson I won't forget." She looked at him, calm and serene. There was no anger, no bitterness, only quiet confidence. Her smile was soft, almost forgiving, as if acknowledging the mistake without needing to dwell on it. She didn't gloat. She simply stood there, Letting the moment speak for itself, the audience slowly began to settle back into their seats, but the energy in the room had changed. People talked in hushed tones, reliving every note of the performance, every moment of suspense, and every surge of emotion. The music had created a bond among them, a shared experience that went beyond casual conversation. The businessman lingered, unsure whether to leave or continue watching her quietly. He realized that this was not just about a performance. It was about courage, patience, and staying true to oneself. The young woman had faced ridicule and mockery, yet she had chosen to respond not with anger, but with her talent and her heart. For many in the room, the performance would remain unforgettable. Some would remember it as the most beautiful music they had ever heard. Others would remember the lesson it carried, that strength isn't always loud, and that true courage often shows up in quiet, unassuming ways. The businessman, for his part, felt a deep change within himself. He had come expecting to dominate, to assert power, and perhaps to feel superiority. Instead, he had been humbled, inspired, and reminded of something he had long forgotten: humility, respect, and the quiet power of true talent. The young woman didn't linger for applause or praise. She simply walked away gracefully, leaving the lounge filled with a sense of awe and inspiration. Her presence, her courage, and her music had transformed the space, reminding everyone that true greatness is measured not by appearances or arrogance, but by authenticity, patience, and heart. Even after she left, the lounge remained quiet for a few moments. People looked at each other, still absorbing the experience, still feeling the impact of the performance. The businessman remained standing, silent, reflecting on everything he had witnessed. He realized that life had given him a rare gift that evening, a reminder of what truly mattered, and a lesson in humility he would carry forever for the young woman. The performance was not about winning or proving anyone wrong. It was about expressing herself, sharing her gift, and showing that courage and patience could speak louder than arrogance or mockery. And, in doing so, she had left an unforgettable mark on everyone present, including the businessman who had walked in expecting to mock and leave with pride, only to leave humbled, inspired, and forever changed. The story of that night would linger in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. The young woman became a symbol not for fame, not for attention, but for quiet courage, inner strength, and the power of staying true to oneself. And the businessman, who had once smirked at her, carried that lesson forward, reminded that humility, respect, and acknowledgement of talent are gifts we should never take for granted. The lounge slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but something had shifted. People spoke softly, smiled more gently, and remembered that sometimes the quietest people have the most powerful voices. And for everyone there, the memory of the music, the courage, and the lesson would remain quietly inspiring them long after the final note had faded.